Hi, how are folks doing? So, my honor to introduce Dr. Rumman Chowdhury. We had an opportunity to speak earlier today, and I just want to share a little bit of background on you. You've been in data analytics, and I would say data patterns, a lot with human behavior, your whole career, starting with undergraduate degrees at MIT, masters in, I think it was computational methods at Columbia, California, PhD, and then going on to lead AI and algorithmic bias identification and mitigation at first Accenture globally, and then Twitter, and now doing consulting with nations, with the United Nations, and recently, U.S. Special Envoy appointment for artificial intelligence for the United States. So pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. My mic is, there it is. Thank you. Super excited to be here in a really engaged audience and environment as well. So thank you.
Yeah, so I want to go back because AI, and especially generative AI with ChatGPT, it's really hit like a tidal wave over the last 12 to 18 months. Very new to a lot of people who really hadn't been exposed to AI. You've been immersed in AI for years, so has it been surprising, all of the hype and the buzz about generative AI to you?
Yeah, great question. You know, hindsight's always 2020. I think people want to say they saw it coming, but the reality is I don't think anybody really did. Even OpenAI was surprised at the big reception that ChatGPT received. And you know, now that we look back on it, my hypothesis is that this wasn't a revolution in transformer technology or AI compute. It actually was a revolution in accessibility. More and more people could directly interact with an AI system in a plain language, understandable way. There was so much of it that was about the design of the interaction as much as there was the actual advances in technology. So it's actually a very fascinating case study, generative AI and ChatGPT, on how sometimes as engineers we get really bogged down in the computational details, but the reality is it has to be very easy and understandable by your end user. In this case, the end user was basically anybody in the world. So they expanded the market of people who interact with AI systems from actually a pretty small slice of the universe, people who can program, people who understand computational methods, to anybody on Earth overnight.
So is this like a tipping point in being able to democratize AI for everybody?
I think so, yes. And I just want to be careful because much of this is actually around the no-code capabilities, right? And so, like hand in hand with the launch of generative AI has actually been the increased popularity of low-code or no-code approaches to product development. We think about things like Canva, et cetera. It brings AI and these sort of advanced capabilities in a way that is very drag and drop and more intuitive. But there's a lot of computational heavy lifting happening behind the hood, under the hood. But yeah, I think this really is like a revolution in democratizing at least the ability to interact with these technologies for good and for bad. I think we're grappling with both ends of it.
Right. I want to come back to the good and for bad because that's fascinating in and of itself. But first I want to start with it's democratizing it not just in our daily lives, but in our work lives. And there's a lot of folks, you mentioned no code for software developers, but content creators, IT operations folks, security folks. It's really, there's something for everybody in generative AI. And the question is, what are the overall conclusions you can draw about workforce implications? Is AI coming for my job?
Yeah,
right?
That is the number one question I get asked, any talk, etc. And I'm starting to frame it as like augmentation versus automation, right? Mm-hmm. And the reality is most jobs will actually not be fully automated away. What we will see is an augmentation. So OpenAI, the company that built ChatGPT, actually wrote a paper with economists making predictions about certain jobs and how much automation will happen or augmentation will happen due to specifically large language models like ChatGPT. And their conclusion was that 80% of jobs will have about 10% automated away, and 20% of jobs will have more than that. So there are some jobs that are at risk, and some of which we're starting to see, like journalists, for example, copywriters maybe, but most jobs will actually see a productivity boost or efficiencies boost that's more akin to email, like low-level tasks being made a lot easier. So most likely you're not going to use ChatGPT to write complex code, Copilot or something like that to write complex code. You'll use it to actually automate base level code that's fairly generic. And if you wanted to do, but you have now more time opened up to really debug the hairier problems, to focus on something that's a little bit more difficult to do that maybe a programming bot is not able to do. And it's the same thing with content generation, right? If I just wanted to make standard copy for a website, totally fine. I can just use public tools that are out there. If someone's trying to make a custom bespoke imagery relating to, Pixar is not going to get automated with generative AI, frankly.
Right.
They probably use a lot of generative AI, but they still need to use people to bring in the human imagination, to make sure that what they're making is above and beyond the basic.
Right. So, and that's, the people driving the innovation and the thought process, because generative AI, there's no real understanding, right? It's seen so many patterns of storytelling, for instance, that it knows how to tell a story just because this word, I put these words after it, and then it tells a story based from every other story. So it's doing something original but not innovative.
Right. It's synthesis. It's not generation. Right. And there is value to synthesis, right? If I recount my day, I may add certain embellishments that are funny or emphasize certain things because I want you to maybe evoke a certain feeling for it, right? You could maybe generate something like that with the language model. What it's not going to be able to do is create something wholly new. So, and we've seen this for years. So I used to teach at a data science boot camp, and my students, one of the most common projects my students would do is they would want to create an AI that made music like Mozart, right? And inevitably, it doesn't create new Mozart. It makes more Mozarty Mozart,
right?
More Bachy Bach. So it's it's a flavor, and it really emphasizes that flavor. What it's not going to. If Mozart didn't exist, AI would not be able to do that.
Right. So the things that AI can and can't do. Let's now get into the AI for good, AI for bad. A lot of people refer to that as responsible AI.
Right.
Responsible AI is a very loaded term, though. And how would you unpack responsible AI?
I think there are many uses of the term. I also see trustworthy. The U.S. government now uses safe, secure, and trustworthy AI because they're trying to bring in sort of a cybersecurity aspect, which all makes sense. But ultimately, what I specifically do in responsible AI is not ESG work. So there is AI for good, which is literally, solving problems in society using artificial intelligence. And those are all incredibly valuable. But what I'm talking about is core product development and ensure product development is happening responsibly. Thinking through the impact on your end user, thinking through whether or not the product is performing as it should for everybody that you want to be using your product. And also, I learned this term from a friend of mine at Amazon, anti-personas, people you did not think of being impacted by your product who are impacted by your product.
So let's, I want to pull the thread a little bit on this, responsible AI, because there's what you're trying to do with AI, but then there's the impact on the people around you, the impact on your workforce as you're, plowing ahead with generative AI initiatives.
Right.
And one of the things that you said that I wasn't expecting was you have to first ask yourself, why am I doing this? Should I be doing this?
Right. I have seen so many instances of people using AI for things, and I actually asked the question, of all the problems you could solve, why did you solve this one? And it is a very, very good question to ask, and really deeply think about, is this solving a customer need, or is this just you're very excited and you're feeling FOMO and you're like, I got to push a product out, so let me get the lowest hanging fruit. what you will see over and over, the people who really shape industry, shape business, make products that are truly innovative are not the people who just got an MVP out the door. They're the people who actually took the time to sit and think about what they should build, think about whether or not it solves a problem, and actually find a market need they are solving. I've been in this game for a while, as you mentioned earlier, and I've heard the like, oh well, companies get left behind narrative for probably about 8 years to 10 years at this point about AI, and I can very confidently say you're not going to get left behind. You are better off thinking through a good solution, even if you come out after somebody else, because if your product is that much better, it will not matter what came before you. And frankly, the history of Silicon Valley is littered with this, right? Uber was not the first Uber was not the first rideshare company.
Right.
Sidecar was. So why does nobody remember what Sidecar? So it does not actually matter if you are first to market, unless of course you are like a Microsoft, in which case when you literally move a market.
Right.
That is not the case. For most companies, my advice would always be like, yes, there's first mover advantage, but people forget that the first mover also absorbs all the risk. And the second mover, the fast follow, is often the one that can see all the mistakes that were made and move. And smart fast follows can actually solve those problems and avoid the obstacles.
So the thought process, part of that, I think, and I want to come back to the Microsoft, because Microsoft's fascinated me for years, because if you look at early 2000s, the big tech giants, right? It would have been Microsoft, it would have been Oracle, it would have been Dell, HP, IBM, right? And everybody had designs on cloud. Yep. And yet the big winners were AWS, who was like a bookstore, Google, who was a search engine, and Microsoft, the lone company that, what was it? They just thought hard, were committed to it, and put the time and investment into it.
That's right. I mean, AWS actually is you're right. They were an online bookstore. How does an online bookstore become an infrastructure behemoth, right? To be clear, this is not just about AWS. It's about how Amazon is not the delivery infrastructure of America minimum, right? We don't want to send things via USPS anymore. Amazon actually gets there a lot faster. UPS is being upheld because of all the Amazon delivery. So it's very, very fascinating that, and again, this requires strategy and foresight, not just jumping into whatever trend comes next for your narrow view of what you're building today.
Right. So responsible AI, I want to touch upon another one that you had mentioned about what are the impacts on your workforce and the productivity that you expect out of it, because most of us operate on we're not on a 9-to-5 schedule, right?
No,
so
who is anymore?
So all I hear now is productivity. Generative AI is about productivity.
Right.
And to what end?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I wonder that as well. We are living in an era of unprecedented, near infinite, constant productivity. We probably produce significantly faster than any generation that's lived before us, and it's been computationally enabled. Whether we're talking about email or having a smartphone or whatever, we're 24/7 available. And again, correct, to what end? What is the impact it's going to have on your mental health and psyche, or your family, or your ability to actually be a functional human being, but also even bringing it back to the workplace, right? I managed a fairly large team of engineers and researchers and at Twitter, and I thought a lot about what people are doing, whether it is fulfilling to them, whether it is interesting to them, beyond just, is this solving, are they checking the boxes of being productive enough? So generative AI brings with it a lot of opportunity. We have to be very intentional. I think there's often an assumption that good things will just follow. That has never been the case. I am a strong believer that you go towards what you look at.
Right.
If we envision a world in which we lead balanced lives, we have a job that's fulfilling, we're really productive, we're making things that we're really proud of, and also you are a good parent or a good sibling or a good partner or a good member of your community, then we are aiming towards that. If we just think of this as a tool for productivity, we will just have a lot more hustle culture.
Right. So I could suggest maybe generative AI could help, whether if you're an executive that you're doing your generative AI initiative, your generative AI in some fashion, you could use it to what's the mental health of my workforce? What do I know about their work habits and what they're doing that would suggest what their mental health is? Are they working too much, for instance?
Right.
And if I'm a lower level practitioner, I hate to say lower level practitioner, but not the person
Beginner,
making the rules,
right.
but somebody who's more novice. You have that at your disposal too, to understand, to help cultivate healthy environments in the workforce.
That's exactly it. And I'm glad you used that phrase. It really is about cultivating healthy environments. Often these are seen as like a loss leader, but the thing is they are long-term beneficial. Obviously, as the phrase goes, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And it feels like a sprint because a lot of us do work in sort of this agile way of like constantly iterating. And then we get hyper-focused on the next 2 weeks. But then you have to take a step back and say, oh, right, the goal of this was not for me to push out this code. The goal of it was to create this platform or have this experience or have this app. And it's the same thing, right? You want a team that is delivering at a constant rate all the time. Sometimes you got to push the gas, but then sometimes you got to let up.
What's your advice when you're working with, and I know you have Parity Consulting, what's your advice to companies that have made the decision that we're going to do stuff, we're doing something, we're active in this? How do you counsel them on, do this, don't do that?
Yeah, no, great question. I think first and foremost, what you said in the beginning, like really isolate what the problem is for the customer, what the need is, and also think through whether a generative AI solution is the most efficient solution or whether there is another solve that's a bit easier or better. That would be sort of out of the gate. Like, what problem are you fundamentally solving? Is generative AI actually going to enable you to solve it? And how do you build around the governance methodologies to ensure that this AI solution remains something useful? I think what we have not yet seen is full generative AI products rolling out that need to be maintained, because I think all of us get excited about product rollout, and then everyone disappears when it's time to do the maintenance and the debugging, right? 3 years from now, how useful will your product be? 6 months from now, how useful will your product be, right? So there'll be the moment it launches, the impact it has, but also thinking through a long-term strategy of making it a sustainable product. Because generative AI is so new, we don't know what that actually looks like. We haven't yet tackled this problem of making these generative AI products be truly sustainable.
So that's interesting. So how do we get there? Because people are making the investments, they are doing it, and what I'm hearing you say, not to put words in your mouth, but there's best practices and have a center of excellence, have an AI officer and all this stuff to get something out the door. But we're in the infancy of how do you sustain something and evolve it over time? How do you envision that developing?
I think a big part of it is going to be enhancing how we govern AI systems. The thing I'm working on now is sort of an offshoot of AI security, but I focus on responsible use. It's called red teaming. So ways in which we gather methods of in-context public feedback. And the public is, I use the term public very loosely, just basically anybody who is not directly in the company doing the product build, right? So the public could be your end user. The public could actually be experts you've curated to test your product, right? And that's sort of stress testing, which is more common in cybersecurity. I'm actually bringing that into responsible use. So if you say I'm making a healthcare chatbot that helps advise patients on, how to talk to their doctor, great. Assemble a panel of people who are representative of your customer base and let them have that. Let them identify problems. Let them find issues. So it's moving things away from reactive to proactive. How can you find problems before they even happen? And that's really what leads to a better customer experience at the end.
So so it's really, to me, it sounds like you've got a pilot program, right? Like I have my finished product, and before I go out to the masses, I'm trying to figure out who's my intended targets, find those intended targets, and get feedback. It sounds like this.
Yeah, pretty
this
much.
whole
I mean,
continuous
and user
feedback.
testing is not a new concept.
Yeah.
So structured public feedback actually is a paper I have coming out in a couple of weeks, and we actually specifically talk through feedback as of your algorithm and your model, your algorithmic system, versus saying just general product feedback. So specifically, it is targeted towards finding issues in how the product may accidentally or purposely be misused in context. So in security red teaming, it's about finding all the ways in which a malicious actor could do something bad with your data or with your model or with your product. In responsible AI red teaming, it is actually about unintended consequences, right? So how might the model hallucinate? How might it bring up actually incorrect information? And what might be the outcome, the adverse outcome of that event happening?
How do you, if we talk a little bit more about hallucinations, it's a big concern, and I actually try to get, I basically try to get Bard and ChatGPT to hallucinate, and it's very
hilarious.
easy. It is hilarious.
It's very actually easy and it's hilarious.
It's a very good word, but and you get it to just say ridiculous stuff,
right,
very confidently.
Yes.
So how do you catch that stuff?
I think hallucinations is going to be one of the hardest problems to solve because of the nature of generative AI models. As you mentioned, it's basically very, very fancy next word prediction. There is no reproducibility, and it's very hard to. So with traditional software engineering, A leads to B leads to C.
Right.
In this case, it's like A can lead to any, probabilistically, any range of answers from A through Q.
Right.
Right. And then each one of those has another set of probabilities. So it's like, the space blows up, right? The measurement space blows up very, very quickly. I think, and this is why I think having public feedback is helpful, because you can actually gather feedback at scale.
Right.
And what you can do is start to create ways of measuring the likelihood of something happening.
Right.
So how hard is it to induce a hallucination, right? Do you have to actually keep digging at it, or does it just pop up with something crazy? And there's a difference between how, whether or not you need to address it or how severe the problem is. So what I'm trying to work towards is a more traditional cybersecurity style, severity measurements, likelihood, impact, et cetera. And these models will not be perfect, but no technology is perfect, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to move towards is essentially a justifiable or credible way of saying, we have stress tested this as well as we can, and we can confidently release this out to the public because we have A, proactively identified what we can identify, and then B, the other part of my recommendation is to create methods of feedback. I think often we forget that if something goes wrong, people have to have a way to find us.
Right.
How do we create methods of feedback so that if something does go wrong, it's being addressed quickly, it's being addressed appropriately?
Right. What are some, you just give examples, a couple examples maybe of unintended people with the best intentions, yeah, having wrong, it's leading to...
Many. Yeah. So last year, DEF CON is the largest hacker conference in the world. Last August, I ran a red teaming exercise. It was actually sponsored by the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. And we created red teaming exercises around intentional and unintentional use and misuse. And we asked questions about, for example, political misinformation, citizens' rights, human rights. And, for example, and these are very, understandable use cases where somebody could ask, where's my local polling center? And it could give you the wrong address, the wrong place. Or you could say, I think I might have this medical condition. What do you think? We also did a red teaming exercise on scientific mis and disinformation with COVID and climate scientists. And there are actually a lot of really great feedback from that crowd. Number one, to what you pointed out, these models speak very confidently, and it's amazing how it can just spew back incorrect information with a high degree of confidence. Now, to scientists, that's terrible, because a lot of science is about sharing uncertainty, right? So much of science is not we solved this. I think to a layperson, they want definitive answers, but most of science is about exploration. And again, when we think of climate, or especially COVID, we were unsure about the science. Mm-hmm. So a large language model is not actually built to communicate uncertainty well. So it would say confidently that this is the outcome, and the scientists are like, oh, well, that's not exactly right. It works in this use case, but not in that use case. But they're the subject, they're the literal people who do this. They would have a degree of subject matter expertise that you and I wouldn't, right? Yeah. They can spot the deep fake, we cannot.
Right. So what's your, what's your prediction for the next couple of years? And I'm going to say in particularly with generative AI, because everybody thinks it's like we're all in, and as you said, you have to really think hard about what problem is I'm trying to solve. Am I trying to solve something because it's easy and I know I can do it? Or am I trying to solve something because I think it makes my business better or my whatever better?
And there's nothing wrong with solving an easy problem, right? Like there's something to be said about like low-level efficiency gains that are very, very valuable. But let's not pretend that that's an earth-shattering moment, right? I think sometimes in all of the hype, we get a little bit confused between an AI travel agent and acting like that's like this earth-shattering thing when like that was just kind of like a nice thing we could have, right? So predictions for generative AI. Actually, I gave my predictions to Time Magazine for their Davos issue, which is funny. And what I was saying is that I actually think we're moving past the hype cycle really quickly. We're actually going to start hitting the trough of disillusionment, if you're familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, right?
Yeah.
And actually, I'm very happy when things in the trough of disillusionment, because now we are truly in a space where we are being critical and thinking about the efficacy and value of things. And the thing is, you ultimately come out of that trough and into like the actual appropriate real use case.
Right.
So I'm actually enthusiastic about being in the trough of disillusionment, because there was so much noise. It was hard to parse out real value. I think now we're swinging towards being overly critical, which I'm okay with, because now we can really start solving bigger problems and being a lot more deliberative.
All right. And as we solve those problems, policies, regulations, governance becomes important. I know you're doing some consulting now. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts or plans? I don't know how much you can go into it.
No, that's totally fine. I've advised the UK AI Safety Institute, the US AI Safety Institute is kicking off very, very soon. And I'm working with the National Institutes for Standards and Technology. If you look at President Biden's executive order, there's actually a pretty huge remit for them to be delivering on benchmarks, measurements, et cetera. So, keep an eye on it, because they're going to be coming out with some really, really great stuff.
Perfect. Dr. Chowdhury, thank you so much for your time.
You.
I really appreciate it. Thank you.